me start with something that will make you uncomfortable. And I apologize in advance, but someone needs to say it. I'm 99 years old. I've watched people make decisions about money for nearly a century now, and I've seen the same patterns repeat over and over. And I'm telling you, the math doesn't lie. The psychology is predictable. The solution is straightforward. Now it's your turn to decide whether you'll act on. If you're keeping most of your money in a bank account, waiting for the right time to invest, you're not playing it safe. You're choosing a guaranteed loss. And I can prove it with arithmetic so simple that any high school student should understand it. Yet somehow, very smart people miss this constantly. Here's the math nobody wants to face. If inflation runs at 3% annually, which is pretty normal, and your savings account pays 0.5%, you're losing 2.5% of your purchasing power every single year. That's not a risk. That's a certainty. Over a decade, you'll lose about 25% of what that money can actually buy. Not what it says on the bank statement, but what it can do in the real world. And that's assuming inflation stays at the government's polite number. We've all been to the grocery store lately. We know better. Now, I know what you're thinking. But Charlie, cash feels safe. I can see the number. It doesn't go down. I understand that feeling. I really do. After 99 years on this earth, I've learned that feelings are powerful things. But here's the problem. You're watching the wrong number. You're measuring nominal dollars when you should be measuring purchasing power. It's like celebrating that your car's speedometer still works while ignoring that you're running out of gas. The psychology here is predictable, and understanding it is half the battle. We humans have what psychologists call loss aversion. We hate losing what we have more than we enjoy gaining something new. It's built into our brains from thousands of years of evolution. On the savannah, losing your food meant death. Gaining extra food was nice, but not losing what you had was essential. So we clutch our cash, terrified of seeing that number drop, while inflation quietly pickpockets us year after year. We're so afraid of a 20% decline that might recover that we accept a guaranteed 30% loss over a decade. That's not rational. That's just expensive fear. Here's another way to think about it. In physics, there's a concept called entropy. Things naturally move from order to disorder unless you add energy. Your cash has entropy too. Its purchasing power decays naturally unless you do something about it. And there's compound interest, which Einstein allegedly called the eighth wonder of the world. But here's what Einstein should have mentioned. It works both ways. When inflation compounds at 3% and your returns are essentially zero, you're watching reverse compound interest destroy your wealth in slow motion. It's painless enough that you don't notice year to year, but devastating over decades. Let me share a principle that has saved me from countless mistakes over the years. It's simple, but powerful. Always invert. Instead of asking, what should I buy? Ask, what are the ways I'm certain to lose? When you invert the cash question, the answer becomes obvious. Holding cash in an inflationary environment is choosing certain loss over uncertain but probable gain. You're picking the guaranteed wrong answer because it feels comfortable. I learned this from studying mathematics, not finance. The great mathematician Carl Jacobi used to say, invert, always invert. Many hard problems become easy when you flip them around. So instead of asking how to get rich, ask how to avoid staying poor. Instead of asking what investments to make, ask what investments to avoid. The answers often become clearer. And when you apply inversion to the cash question, the answer screams at you. Don't volunteer to lose purchasing power. Here's what most people miss, and it might be the most important thing I say today. People think volatility equals risk. They see stock prices bouncing around and they think, that's risky. They see their bank balance staying flat and they think, that's safe. But real risk is the permanent loss of purchasing power. A stock portfolio might drop 15% in a bad year, Sure, that's uncomfortable, but cash is guaranteed to drop 3% in purchasing power every single year, and that loss is permanent. You never get it back. Warren and I didn't build Berkshire by holding cash. We held businesses, productive assets that throw off earnings, raise prices, and adapt to inflation. When we bought See's Candies back in 1972 for $25 million, people thought we overpaid. But See's could raise prices. The brand had pricing power. Every year, the chocolates cost a little more, and customers happily paid because they loved the product. Cash in a bank account has no such power. It just sits there, shrinking in real terms, while productive assets grow and adapt. So let me tell you about 5 assets that are actually safer than cash. Safer in the only way that matters, preserving and growing your real purchasing power over time. Most people call these stocks, but I prefer to think of them as what they actually are. Partial ownership in real businesses that serve real customers and solve real problems. Here's the key insight that changes everything. A well-run business with pricing power naturally adjusts for inflation. Think about Coca-Cola, which Berkshire owns a significant piece of. When inflation hits, Coca-Cola doesn't just sit there losing value like a dollar bill. It raises prices. Its earnings grow. The value of your ownership grows with it. The numbers tell the story. Over the past century, stocks have returned about 10% annually, while inflation averaged about 3%. That's a real return of 7%. Cash has returned essentially zero real return, often negative. Now, I want to be clear about something, because this is where most investment advice goes wrong. I'm not saying buy just any stock. Most stocks are overpriced most of the time, and most investors are their own worst enemies. They buy when prices are high because everyone else is buying. They sell when prices are low because everyone else is selling. That's a recipe for disaster. What I am saying is this: owning pieces of great businesses, companies with strong brands, loyal customers, and the ability to raise prices is fundamentally safer than holding cash over any meaningful time period. If you don't know how to pick individual stocks, and honestly, most people shouldn't try, a simple, low-cost index fund that owns pieces of hundreds of businesses is a perfectly sensible approach. You won't beat the market, but you'll match it. And matching the market beats losing 2.5% per year to inflation. There's an important concept here, your circle of competence. You need to know what you know, and more importantly, know what you don't know. If you understand businesses, if you can read financial statements, if you won't panic during downturns, then picking individual stocks might be appropriate. If not, stick with index funds. There's no shame in that. It's actually quite wise. Notice I said productive. That word is doing a lot of work in that sentence. I'm not talking about buying land and hoping someone pays you more for it later. That's speculation, not investment. I'm talking about property that generates income, rental buildings, commercial properties, real estate that pays you while you own it. Productive real estate has several natural advantages in an inflationary environment. Rents tend to rise with inflation. When everything costs more, landlords can charge more. Your income stream keeps pace with rising prices. If you have a mortgage, it stays fixed while you pay it back with cheaper dollars over time. Inflation actually helps you pay off the debt, and the underlying asset often appreciates as construction costs rise. It costs more to build new buildings, which makes existing buildings more valuable. Warren and I have owned plenty of real estate through Berkshire over the years, but always productive real estate. Buildings that businesses operate from, properties that serve a purpose and generate steady income. Never speculation, always production. Here's a test I use for any real estate investment. If the property stopped appreciating tomorrow, would I still want to own it based on the income it generates? If the answer is yes, you might have a real investment. If the answer is no, you're speculating. And speculation, as I like to say, is just gambling with a more respectable name. Now, I should mention, being a landlord is work, It requires judgment, maintenance, tenant selection. If you don't want that responsibility, you can own real estate through publicly traded REITs without ever having to fix a leaky faucet. The principle remains the same. Productive assets beat passive cash. This one surprises people, but it might be the most important asset on this entire list. Your skills, your knowledge, your ability to create value and earn money. That's an asset. And for most people, especially younger people, it's far more valuable than anything sitting in a bank account. Benjamin Franklin understood this over 200 years ago. He said an investment in knowledge pays the best interest. That wasn't just a clever saying. It was profound financial wisdom. Here's why this matters. Let's say you have $50,000 sitting in a savings account, and you're 40 years old, with another 25 years of earning ahead of you. That $50,000, losing purchasing power to inflation, will be worth considerably less in real terms by the time you retire. But what if you invested some of that money in yourself, in education, training, skills that make you more valuable? What if that investment increased your earning power by just 10%? If you're making $80,000 a year, 10% is $8,000 per year in additional income. Over 25 years, that's $200,000. And that's not counting raises, promotions, or the compound effect of starting from a higher base. I've spent my entire life learning law, mathematics, psychology, physics, business, history, not to collect credentials, but because understanding more things helps me make better decisions. Every new discipline I studied gave me new tools to understand the world. You can't build a house with just a hammer, and you can't navigate a complex world with just one way of thinking. But here's the important caveat. Investing in yourself only works if you're honest about what skills actually matter. Learning underwater basket weaving doesn't count. Learn skills that create value for others, skills that are hard to replicate, skills that match real market demand. And unlike stocks or real estate, your skills can't be taken away by a market crash. They're yours forever. Now, this one requires some nuance, so please hear me out completely. I said high-quality bonds in specific situations. Not all bonds, not most bonds, and certainly not bonds as a permanent home for your wealth. A bond is simply a promise to pay you money in the future. The question is, what will that money be worth when you get it? If you buy a 30-year bond yielding 4% and inflation runs at 3%, you're barely ahead, and you've locked up your money for 3 decades. That's usually not a good trade. But short-term bonds from highly creditworthy entities can serve a specific purpose. They're not there to make you rich. They're there to give you optionality. They keep your powder dry for when genuine opportunities appear, while earning something better than the 0.5% your savings account pays. At Berkshire, Warren and I always keep some money in short-term treasury bills. Not because we think it's a great investment, but because we want to be ready when attractive opportunities come along. If a wonderful business becomes available at a fair price, we want to be able to act. So think of high-quality short-term bonds as a temporary parking place, not a destination. They're a tool for maintaining flexibility. Here's my rule. If a bond's yield doesn't meaningfully exceed expected inflation, you're volunteering to lose purchasing power in slow motion. At least with pure cash, you maintain complete liquidity. A bad bond gives you all the downsides of cash with less flexibility. This category is full of traps, so I need to be very careful here. When I say useful hard assets, I mean things that hold value because they're genuinely useful to humans. Not because we've collectively agreed they're valuable, not because they're shiny, not because someone on the internet promised they'd go to the moon. I'm talking about productive farmland that grows food people eat, machinery that helps businesses produce goods, equipment that enables valuable services, things that do something, things that would still matter if the financial system had a heart attack tomorrow. A farmer who owns good land and knows how to work it has real security. That land will produce food whether the stock market is up or down, whether politicians are competent or not, whether the Federal Reserve makes good decisions or bad ones. Now, let me be direct about something that might upset some people. I'm not talking about gold. A lot of folks think gold is the answer to inflation. They imagine that when everything else fails, gold will save them. But here's the thing, gold just sits there. It doesn't produce anything. It doesn't generate earnings. It doesn't adapt or grow. When you buy gold, you're buying it hoping someone else will pay you more for it later. That's speculation, not investment. I like to put it this way. You could take all the gold ever mined in human history, melt it down, and form it into a cube. It would fit comfortably inside a baseball infield, about 67 feet on each side. And it would just sit there, doing absolutely nothing, requiring expensive security guards to watch it. Or, with the same money, you could buy all the farmland in America, plus a dozen companies the size of ExxonMobil, and still have $1 trillion left over for walking around money. Those assets would generate hundreds of billions in earnings every single year. They'd produce food and energy that people actually need. They'd grow and adapt and create real value, which sounds smarter to you. The same logic applies to cryptocurrency. It doesn't produce anything. Its value depends entirely on finding someone willing to pay more for it than you did. That's the greater fool theory with better marketing. Hard assets only make sense if they're productive. Function over hope. Always. Let me tie all of this together because there's a pattern here that matters tremendously. All 5 of these assets have something in common. They do something. They produce. They create value. Businesses produce goods and services people want. Real estate houses families and enables commerce. Skills enable you to create value and solve problems. Bonds, when used correctly, provide flexibility to seize opportunities. Useful hard assets produce things the world needs. Cash does none of this. Cash just sits there, passively waiting, slowly losing value, while you tell yourself you're being responsible. The question isn't whether cash has a role. Of course it does. Keep 3 to 6 months of expenses liquid and accessible. That's your emergency fund. That's your sleep well at night money. But 3 to 6 months of expenses isn't 3 to 6 years of income. If you've got $200,000 sitting idle when you only spend $40,000 per year, you've got 5 years of expenses earning nothing while inflation eats them alive. That's not caution. That's self-harm with good intentions. The people who keep too much cash aren't stupid. Many are highly intelligent. So why do they keep making this error? The answer is psychology, not intelligence. And understanding these patterns is crucial if you want to avoid them. First, there's social proof. Everyone you know keeps money in the bank. Your parents did it, your friends do it. It feels like the responsible adult thing to do. So you do it too, without examining whether it actually makes sense. But just because everyone does something doesn't make it right. In Weimar Germany, people who kept their savings in cash were completely wiped out. The socially normal thing was also the financially catastrophic thing. Social proof is the terrible compass for financial decisions. Second, there's availability bias. The pain of losing money in a market crash is vivid and memorable. It's on the news. People talk about it at dinner parties. The stories stick in your mind for decades. But the quiet erosion of inflation is invisible and abstract. You don't see it. You don't feel it day to day. So you fear the vivid thing more than the invisible thing, even when the invisible thing is actually more dangerous. You can see a stock drop 20% in a week. You can't easily see your purchasing power drop 30% over a decade. The second loss is actually worse. But the first feels worse because it's dramatic. That's your brain lying to you. Your brain evolved to notice tigers, not inflation. Third, There's loss aversion, which we discussed earlier. We hate losing what we have so much that we'll do irrational things to avoid the feeling of loss, even if it means accepting certain loss to avoid uncertain loss. The solution isn't to pretend these tendencies don't exist. You can't wish them away. You're human. The solution is to know they exist, recognize them when they're influencing you, and build systems that protect you from your own psychology. Before I close, let me share some broader lessons. These go beyond money, but they apply to money beautifully. This applies everywhere in life, not just finance. The comfortable choice and the correct choice rarely align perfectly. It feels right to avoid difficult conversations, but having them usually leads to better relationships. It feels right to eat the dessert, but skipping it usually leads to better health. It feels right to keep cash safe in the bank, but investing it wisely usually leads to better outcomes. Your feelings evolve to keep you alive on the savannah, not to optimize your 401k or your marriage or your career. Respect your feelings, but verify them against reality. Compound interest is the most powerful force in finance, but it requires time to work. The person who invests a little bit consistently for 40 years will almost always beat the person who tries to get rich quick. The same principle applies everywhere. The writer who writes a page a day for 10 years produces 3,600 pages. The person who waits for inspiration produces nothing. The person who exercises moderately for decades stays healthy. The person who does extreme workouts for a month gets injured. Patience isn't passive. It's the active choice to let time work in your favor. Warren and I didn't get rich by being geniuses. We got rich by not being idiots consistently for a very long time. We didn't panic sell during crashes. We didn't chase hot trends. We didn't confuse activity with accomplishment. We didn't let our egos make investment decisions. We just tried to avoid obvious mistakes, decade after decade. That approach is available to anyone. You don't need a high IQ. You don't need insider information. You don't need luck. You just need discipline, honesty with yourself, and the humility to know what you don't know. Most people never examine their assumptions. They do what their parents did, what their friends do, what society expects. They keep cash in the bank because that's what responsible people do. They work jobs they hate because that's what adults do. They live lives that don't fit them because they never stop to ask if there was another way. The examined life isn't just philosophically superior, it's practically superior. The person who thinks carefully about their finances will do better than the person who follows conventional wisdom blindly. The person who thinks carefully about their career will find more satisfaction than the person who drifts. Thinking is hard work. That's why so few people do it. But the rewards are enormous. After 99 years, I can tell you with certainty, money isn't the point. Freedom is the point. The freedom to make choices, the freedom to say no to things you don't want, the freedom to spend time with people you love, the freedom to work on problems that interest you, the freedom to help others. Money is just a tool for creating freedom. If your money is shrinking due to inflation, you're losing freedom. If your money is growing through productive assets, you're gaining freedom. Think about your money not as numbers on a screen, but as units of future freedom. That changes how you think about where to put it. Let me give you one more mental model that ties everything together. Opportunity cost. Every dollar you keep in cash earning 0.5% is a dollar not earning 7% or 10% in productive assets. That difference compounds over time into massive amounts of foregone wealth. Let me make this concrete. If you keep $100,000 in cash for 30 years at 0.5%, you'll have about $116,000 in nominal terms. But adjusted for 3% inflation, that's worth only about $48,000 in today's purchasing power. You've lost more than half your real wealth by playing it safe. If you'd invested that same $100,000 in a simple index fund averaging 10% returns, you'd have about $1.7 million after 30 years, even adjusted for inflation. That's roughly 700,000 in today's purchasing power. The difference between cash and investing isn't a few percentage points. It's the difference between poverty and comfort in retirement. It's the difference between anxiety and freedom. The math is undeniable. The history is consistent. And yet people keep making the same mistake because it feels safe in the moment. I know some of you are thinking, but Charlie, what if I invest right before a crash? What if stocks drop 40% the week after I buy? It's a fair concern. Let me address it directly. First, if you invest and the market crashes, yes, that's painful. But history shows that if you hold for 10 years, the market has never failed to recover and reach new highs. If you hold for 20 years, you've always made money. Always. Not sometimes. Always. Second, you don't have to invest everything at once. Dollar cost averaging, investing a fixed amount regularly over time, eliminates the timing problem entirely. Sometimes you buy high, sometimes you buy low. It averages out. Simple, effective, removes the emotional decision making. Third, consider the alternative. While you're waiting for the right time to invest, you're losing 3% per year to inflation. You might wait years for a crash that doesn't come, or that isn't as bad as you feared, or that recovers faster than you expected. Waiting for the right time to invest is choosing guaranteed loss to avoid potential loss. The math doesn't support it. Here's a principle I've lived by. When you can't predict outcomes, focus on process. You can't control whether the market goes up or down next year, but you can control whether you're acting rationally, whether you're diversified, whether you're within your circle of competence. Good process, consistently applied over time, leads to good outcomes. Bad process occasionally gets lucky, but usually leads to disaster. I'm 99 years old. I've watched people make decisions about money for nearly a century now, and I've seen the same patterns repeat over and over. The people who understand that productive assets beat passive cash are the ones who build real wealth. They're the ones who retire with security instead of anxiety. They're the ones who have freedom instead of fear. The people who cling to cash because it feels safe end up poorer than they should be. Not because they did anything obviously wrong, but because they let fear make their decisions. You've worked hard for your money. You deserve to see it grow, not shrink. The 5 assets I've discussed today, productive businesses, productive real estate, your own skills, strategic bonds, and useful hard assets, aren't exotic or complicated. They're how thoughtful people have protected and grown wealth for generations. Here's what I want you to do. Take an honest look at your situation. How much of your money is sitting in cash? How much is working for you in productive assets? Are you losing purchasing power while telling yourself you're being safe? If the answers concern you, make a plan. Not a reckless plan, not an overnight transformation, but a thoughtful, rational plan to put your money to work. Keep enough cash for emergencies. Then invest the rest in assets that produce, that grow, that adapt. The choice between cash and productive assets is really a choice between guaranteed decline and probable growth, between comfortable poverty and uncomfortable wealth, between feeling safe and being safe. I know which choice makes sense. I know which choice I've made every day for 8 decades. Now it's your turn. Thank you for listening to an old man talk about money. I hope something I've said helps you see your situation more clearly. Not just the numbers, but what they mean for your freedom, your security, your life. The world rewards rationality in the long run, even when it punishes it in the short run. Be patient. Be disciplined. Be honest with yourself. And for heaven's sake, don't keep all your money in cash and wonder why you're not getting ahead. Go make good decisions.